Now that you understand the forms that you need to send to your passport agency when you have been approved for funding, let's review what is needed to submit a claim to Passport One. While you are encouraged to submit your claims electronically using eClaim or My Direct Plan, you also have the option of submitting Purchase of Service Invoice forms by fax or email. Your Purchase of Service Invoice form is unique to you. Your client code, client name, and payee information is filled out before it's sent to you. Please do not change any information to your client name, client code, or payee information without notifying your passport agency first. Some helpful tips to remember when completing and submitting your claim form include: only submit claims for eligible expenses. If you have questions about the passport funding guidelines, please contact your passport agency. Always include the first page of your Purchase of Service Invoice form in your submission. It is best to have this be the first page of your claim. Attach all official invoices and receipts to your claim. Any missing information will result in a delay in payment, so please make sure you have completed all of the required information. Some expense categories have a maximum reimbursement for each fiscal year. In the total number of receipts invoices section, you will enter the number of receipts and invoices you are submitting as part of this claim, and enter the total dollar amount of the claim in the total amount of receipts invoices. In the last section of page 1 of your Purchase of Service Invoice form, the person managing funds will sign and date this form, confirming that they are, in fact, the person managing funds and that the expenses are admissible. Let's move on to page 2 of your Purchase of Service Invoice form, which begins with support worker hours. Support worker hours are eligible for community participation supports and activities of daily living, education, tutoring, personal training, life skill development, and job coaching, respite, and in-home relief. When completing support worker hours, you will need to include the service type, the start date, the end date, the number of hours and support worker's hourly rate, and the total amount the support worker is being paid. The out-of-province section is the next section to complete. You can enter an N if the support worker hours happened in Ontario, or a Y if the support worker hours happened outside of Ontario. The next section, mileage, follows the same format. You will enter the start date, the end date, the distance driven in kilometers, the rate you are paying the support worker or service provider per kilometer, and the total amount. The next section is to confirm if the service happened in or outside of Ontario. The last section of page 2 of your Purchase of Service Invoice form is for the support worker or service provider signature. The support worker or service provider will need to write their name, sign in the signature box, and date confirming that they provided the hours and mileage documented on this form. It's important to remember that you cannot fit multiple support workers on one page. If you have more than one support worker, a separate page 2 will be needed to be completed for each support worker. This section only needs to be completed if you have hired an independent support worker. If a staffing agency provides support workers for you, that invoice will go under Service Type 8 of this form. Page 3 begins with live event tickets, which includes music events, sporting events, live theater or musicals, and any other type of live entertainment. If you are submitting a claim that includes live event tickets, you will fill in the information including the category, start date, end date, the number of tickets, the cost per ticket, the total amount, and confirm if the live event happened within or outside of Ontario. After entering all of your live event tickets, you will enter the total of all your live event tickets in the subtotal section. As you move through this form, it's important to remember that each of your receipts or invoices goes on a separate line. For example, if you are submitting a claim that includes more than one live event ticket, the first live event invoice would be entered here, and the second here. The next section of your Purchase of Service Invoice form is for community participation, which includes community activities, day programs, memberships and live event season ticket packages, camp, out-of-home respite, transportation provided by an agency, taxi, public transit, and parking, and an annual public transit pass, When submitting a claim that includes one of these service types, you will need to fill in the information including the service type, the name of the service provider, the invoice or receipt number. If you don't have an invoice or receipt number, you can enter Y for yes to confirm that you are submitting a receipt with this claim. You'll also enter the start date, end date, the amount, and confirm if the activity or service happened within or outside of Ontario. After entering all of your community participation activities, you will enter the total number of receipts in the subtotal section. Page 4 of your Purchase of Service Invoice form begins with community participation support supplies and equipment, including sensory items, personal protective equipment, personal fitness equipment, activity, hobby, or recreational supplies and equipment, and any other type of community participation support supplies and equipment. When submitting a claim that includes supplies and equipment, you will need to fill in the category, the name of the supplier, invoice or receipt number, the start date, end date, and amount. Once you have entered all of your supplies and equipment, you will enter the total of these invoices or receipts in the subtotal section. The next section is for technology and includes computers, laptops, tablets, and related accessories, cell phones and phone plans, technology services like internet, mobile apps, software and warranties, other hardware and electronic items, other types of technological services. Like the previous section on this form, when submitting a claim for technology, you will need to fill in the category, the name of the supplier, invoice or receipt number, the start date, end date, and amount. Once you have entered all of your technological items or services, you will enter the total of these invoices or receipts in the subtotal section. The last page of your Purchase of Service Invoice form begins with support worker expenses, including support worker vacation expenses while they are supporting a client during trips and holiday travel, support worker meals. If submitting a claim that includes support worker expenses, you will need to fill in the service type, the name of the service provider, the invoice or receipt number, the start date, end date, amount, and confirm if the service happened within or outside of Ontario. For any services or items you have purchased that do not fit in the other categories, you can document these in the Other Claims section. Be sure to include the name of the service provider, the invoice or receipt number, the start date, end date, amount, and confirm if the service or item was purchased within or outside of Ontario. Person-directed planning is the next section of your Purchase of Service Invoice form. If you hired a person-directed planner and are submitting an invoice for their service, you will need to enter the name of the service provider, the invoice or receipt number, the start date, end date, amount, and confirm if the service happened within or outside of Ontario. The last section of your Purchase of Service Invoice form is administration. If you hired someone to help you in managing your funding and submitting the claim on your behalf, you will need to enter the name of the service provider, the invoice or receipt number, the start date, end date, amount, and confirm if the service happened within or outside of Ontario. You only need to complete the sections on this form that apply to your claim. If you do not have any services, invoice, or receipts for some of the sections on your Purchase of Service Invoice form, you do not need to complete that part of the form. But it's important to remember that page 1 with a person managing fund signature is required each time you are submitting a claim. When submitting a claim, make sure that you attach a clear copy of the receipt or invoice for each expense you would like to be reimbursed for. If the receipt, invoice, or your Purchase of Service form is not clear, your payment will be delayed. Completing your Purchase of Service Invoice form correctly will ensure that your payment is processed as quickly and as accurately as possible. For more information on the Passport Funding Guidelines, please go to passportfunding.ca.